The chandeliers were still glowing gold. The champagne was still cold. And 400 people in their finest clothes were still laughing, still clinking glasses, still celebrating what they believed was the most beautiful love story they had ever witnessed. The band was playing something slow and romantic. The flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent. And in the center of it all, at the head table draped in ivory silk, sat a bride so composed, so breathtakingly still, that more than a few guests quietly whispered that she looked like a painting, like something too perfect to be real. She smiled when smiled at. She nodded when spoken to. She lifted her glass when toasts were made. And not a single person in that ballroom, not one, had any idea that behind those calm, dark eyes, a storm had already passed. That the woman sitting in that wedding dress had already lived through the worst moment of her life, and had already decided exactly what she was going to do about it. Then the lights dimmed. Not all the way, just enough. A low murmur moved through the crowd. People turned. Glasses lowered. The massive screen at the far end of the ballroom flickered once, then twice, then filled with a steady, unmistakable image. A hotel corridor. A door opening. A man, unmistakably the groom, still in his dress shirt from that morning, stepping inside. And standing in the doorway waiting for him, with her arms already reaching for him, was a woman who was not his bride. The room went completely silent. And that silence? That was the sound of everything falling apart. But here is what no one in that room knew. She had seen this footage already, hours ago, and she had let the wedding happen anyway. That was only the beginning. Before we go any further, if you are someone who loves stories about betrayal, resilience, and the kind of quiet strength that hits harder than any outburst ever could, you are in exactly the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know who is here for this. Now, to understand how we got to that ballroom, to that screen, to that silence, we need to go back, all the way back to where it started. His name was Marcus Calloway. And if you have ever met someone who walked into a room and immediately made everyone else feel slightly less significant, you would understand exactly the kind of man Marcus was. He was 41 years old, built like someone who had spent decades not just working out, but engineering his own image. Sharp jaw, tailored everything, a handshake that communicated power before a single word was spoken. He had built his fortune in commercial real estate, the kind of deals that reshaped city skylines, that put his name on buildings and his face in financial magazines. He sat on 3 corporate boards. He had been featured in profiles that described him using words like visionary, titan, force of nature. In certain circles, his name alone opened doors. His opinion could move markets. His endorsement could make a career. People did not just respect Marcus Calloway. They were slightly afraid of him. And Marcus knew it. He had always known it. That was, in many ways, the problem. Because men who are never told no begin to believe that the rules do not apply to them. Men who are never challenged begin to confuse entitlement with intelligence. And men who are always surrounded by people who want something from them begin to see every relationship as a transaction, including the most intimate ones. But that was the private Marcus. The public Marcus was charming, generous, and impossible not to admire. And that was exactly what made him so dangerous. But power like his always comes with secrets. Her name was Diana Wells. And she was, in almost every way that mattered, his opposite. Not because she lacked intelligence, she had more of it than most people in his world. Not because she lacked drive. She had built a quiet, respected career as a financial consultant. The kind of woman that companies called when they needed someone to see what others had missed. But Diana had never been interested in appearances. She wore her competence like a second skin, not a costume. She lived in a clean, comfortable apartment that she had paid for herself. She cooked on Sundays, called her mother twice a week, kept a small circle of friends who knew her actual laugh, not the polished one she used in professional settings. She was, at her core, a woman who believed in people. She believed that honesty was the foundation of everything. That love, real love, was built on consistency and truth. She had been hurt before, of course she had, but she had never let that harden her into someone suspicious or cold. That openness, that warmth, that genuine trust in people, that was her greatest strength. And it was the exact quality that Marcus Calloway had spotted from across a room at a corporate gala and decided, with the cool calculation of a man making a business acquisition, to pursue. She had no idea what she was stepping into. He came after her with everything he had. And Marcus Calloway coming after something was not a subtle experience. It was dinners at restaurants where the chef came out to greet him by name. It was a helicopter ride to a vineyard upstate for a weekend she had never been asked about, but somehow found herself agreeing to. It was flowers that arrived at her office, not roses, because he had paid attention long enough to know she preferred wildflowers, with notes written in his actual handwriting, not printed, not delegated. He was attentive. He was present. He listened in the way that made her feel like the most interesting person in any room they shared. And slowly, despite every instinct that had been sharpened by previous disappointment, Diana Wells began to fall. He told her early on about his ex, a woman named Tanya, someone from his past whom he described with careful, practiced vagueness. Complicated, toxic, someone who had never understood him the way Diana did. He positioned that relationship as a wound he had survived, and in doing so, positioned Diana as the woman who had finally arrived to heal it. It was manipulative. It was deliberate. And it worked, because Diana had no reason yet to doubt him. The engagement came 8 months in. A private dinner, a ring that made 3 of her colleagues audibly gasp when she showed them the next morning, and a proposal that he delivered with such apparent sincerity that Diana cried. Actually cried. In the middle of a restaurant. She said yes before he had even finished asking. And in that moment, she was happier than she had been in years. But something didn't feel completely right. It started small. The way small things always do when something larger is hiding underneath them. A phone call he took in another room. Door closed. Voice lowered. A business trip that extended by 2 days with an explanation that came just a little too quickly, too smoothly, like it had been rehearsed. An evening when he was distracted in a way that felt less like stress and more like distance. Like he was physically present, but somewhere else entirely in his mind. Diana noticed. She always noticed. That was the thing about her. Her professional training had made her acutely aware of inconsistencies, of the places where numbers did not add up, where patterns broke. And the pattern of Marcus was beginning to break in places she could not explain. She asked, gently at first. He answered, smoothly. She pressed, once, and the reaction came fast. Not angry, never overtly angry, but dismissive in a way that made her feel like the problem. Like she was the one creating tension where none existed. Like her intuition was the issue and not the behavior that triggered it. He told her she was stressed about the wedding planning. He told her she was reading into things. He told her, more than once, that her insecurity was going to damage what they had built, and the way he said it, with that particular brand of calm that somehow felt louder than shouting, made her question herself in a way she had never done before. She started apologizing for noticing things. She started second-guessing her own perception. And the engagement continued, and the wedding was planned, and the invitations went out, and Diana Wells told herself she was imagining things. And then came the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 9 hours before she was supposed to walk down an aisle toward the man she believed she loved. She was in the bridal suite, her makeup half done, her mother talking about seating arrangements, 3 bridesmaids orbiting her in a cloud of hairspray and nervous laughter. And her phone buzzed. A message from a number she did not recognize. No text, just a file attached. She opened it because she was, at her core, a woman who needed to know the truth, even when the truth was trying to destroy her. The video was 47 seconds long. Hotel corridor. A door number she recognized. The boutique hotel 2 miles from the venue where Marcus had said he was spending his final wedding eve night with his groomsmen. Timestamp, 6:14 that morning. And there was Marcus, still in the clothes she had seen him photographed in at his bachelor dinner the night before, walking down that corridor with a purposefulness she recognized as his. And there was the door opening. And there was a woman, dark-haired, familiar in a way that took Diana 3 seconds to place, who was not surprised to see him, who pulled him inside like it was something she had done before. Many times before. Diana watched the video twice. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not throw anything across the suite. She sat very still while the room moved around her, while her mother talked about seating arrangements, while the bridesmaids laughed about something that did not reach her at all. And then she made a decision that most people, in that moment, would never have the strength to make. She put the phone down, finished her makeup, and decided to get married. That decision would change everything. What happened inside Diana Wells in those hours between that message and that altar is the kind of thing that most people will never fully understand unless they have lived it themselves. It is the experience of existing in two places at once, in the body that is smiling and nodding and holding a bouquet, and in the mind that has gone somewhere entirely cold and clear and focused. The ceremony was beautiful. Everyone said so afterward. Even after everything that came later, people still mentioned how beautiful the ceremony had been. The flowers, the music, the light coming through the stained glass. And Diana, walking down that aisle in a dress that had taken 6 months to make, with her eyes ahead and her posture perfect, looked like the most serene bride anyone had ever seen. Marcus stood at the altar with a smile that could have convinced anyone. And when he took her hand, and when the vows were spoken, and when he kissed her in front of 400 witnesses, Diana felt none of it. She was already somewhere else. She was already thinking, planning, because grief, when it is experienced by a certain kind of woman, does not dissolve into weeping. It crystallizes. It becomes something dense and purposeful and cold. And Diana Wells had made a decision in that bridal suite that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with what came after. But she wasn't as powerless as he thought. The reception unfolded the way expensive weddings do, in waves of toasts and laughter and orchestrated joy, with everyone slightly too dressed and slightly too well fed, and doing that thing people do at weddings where they pretend, collectively, that the world is simpler than it is. Marcus moved through the room like it was made for him, which in a sense it was. He had paid for most of it, after all. He shook hands with investors. He laughed loudly with his college friends. He kissed Diana's cheek twice in front of her parents and looked, to every camera in the room, like a man at the absolute peak of his life. And Diana smiled. And Diana thanked guests. And Diana danced the first dance with her arms around the neck of a man whose betrayal was still playing on a loop behind her eyes. While she danced, she was also thinking about the phone in her small white clutch purse, about the contact she had made 2 weeks earlier, a week after the first time she had felt something wrong and decided, with the quiet professionalism that defined her, to start collecting rather than confronting. She was thinking about the arrangements she had made the previous night, quietly, with 2 trusted people. She was thinking about the AV system in this ballroom, and who now had access to it. And then more truth surfaced. 3 days before the wedding, a second message had arrived. Same number. More footage. But this was not from that morning. This was from 4 months ago. A restaurant. Intimate. Tucked away. The kind of place chosen specifically not to be seen in. Marcus and Tanya, sitting together across a table in a corner booth, not with the discomfort of 2 people managing a complicated past, but with the ease of 2 people who had never actually stopped. Laughing, touching hands across the table, leaving together. The affair was not a moment of weakness. It was not a single devastating lapse in judgment. It had never ended. The woman he had described as toxic, as complicated, as someone who had never understood him, was someone he had been seeing throughout their entire relationship. throughout the engagement, throughout the wedding planning. The entire architecture of their life together had been built on a lie so complete, so structurally thorough, that Diana felt something shift inside her that she had never felt before. Not heartbreak. She had already processed the heartbreak. This was something cleaner, harder. The feeling of a decision becoming irreversible. It was not about pain anymore. It was not even about Marcus anymore. It was about something larger than both of them. It was about every person in that ballroom who had been invited to witness what he had called their love. It was about truth and who deserved to hold it. Now it wasn't just betrayal, it was war. If you are still with this story right now, and I know you are, drop the word unbelievable in the comments. I want to see who is truly following this. Because what Diana did next is one of the most composed, most extraordinary acts of self-possession I have ever had the experience of telling. Most people, carrying what she was carrying, would have broken. Most people would have confronted him, would have made a scene, would have let the emotion do what emotion does, which is to arrive all at once and overwhelm every other instinct. Diana did none of that. Instead, she became someone she had not known she could be. She moved through the reception with a precision that was almost eerie. She excused herself at exactly the right moment to speak to exactly the right person. Arrangements were confirmed. Timing was locked. The AV coordinator, a young woman who had been briefed not on the full plan, but on exactly what to do and when, received a final signal. And Diana returned to her seat and smiled at Marcus and let him top off her champagne and thanked his business partner for the toast and waited. She was no longer a woman in pain. She was a woman who had made peace with the cost of the truth. He had no idea what was coming. Marcus Calloway was, in that moment, untouchable. That was what it felt like from the inside. And from the outside, frankly, it looked that way too. He stood near the bar with two of his board members, holding court, laughing that deep, authoritative laugh of his. He had signed a development deal the previous month that the industry press was calling the largest single-site commercial contract in the state's history in a decade. His social image was at its absolute peak. The powerful man who had also managed to fall in love, to humanize himself, to prove that ambition and tenderness could coexist. People admired him tonight. They wanted his attention, his approval, his connection. His family sat at a prime table near the front, glowing with the specific pride of a family that has produced someone significant. 3 of his most important investors were in this room. Everything he had spent 20 years building was present in this ballroom, at this hour. Everything was seconds away from collapse. The lights shifted, not dramatically, just a subtle, almost imperceptible dimming, the kind that made a few guests look up from their conversations and toward the ceiling with mild, curious expressions. Then the large screen at the far end of the ballroom, the one that had been cycling through photographs from the wedding all evening, soft golden images of flower arrangements and first looks and ceremony moments, went dark. A murmur, a few heads turning. Marcus glanced toward it from his spot near the bar with the faint, unconcerned look of a man who assumed any technical issue was already being handled by someone he was paying to handle it. And then the screen came back on. Not with a photograph, with a corridor. A hotel corridor, captured by a security camera, with a timestamp visible in the lower right corner. And a man walking down it. And a door opening. And everything Marcus Calloway had ever built beginning to fall. The room went quiet the way rooms only go quiet when something profoundly wrong is happening. Not the polite quiet of an audience settling before a speech. The absolute, breathless quiet of 400 people who have all, simultaneously, understood something they cannot ununderstand. Someone gasped. Someone else said something in a voice too low to hear clearly. At the table near the front, Marcus's mother put her hand over her mouth. One of the investors set down his glass with a sound that, in that silence, was almost loud. And Marcus Calloway, powerful, untouchable Marcus Calloway, went the color of chalk. That was the moment everything collapsed. He turned from the screen to the room, and then from the room to his bride, and the look on his face moved through three distinct expressions in the space of about 2 seconds. The first was confusion, a genuine, reflexive confusion, the split second of a mind trying to process the impossible. The second was recognition, the cold, sickening recognition of exactly what was happening and exactly how bad it was. The third was panic, barely contained behind the muscles of his face, pushing up against his practiced composure like something trapped behind a wall that was no longer thick enough to hold it. He moved toward Diana. He cut through the frozen crowd, ignoring the people on either side of him, his hand reaching for her arm before he had even reached her. Diana turned to face him. And this is the part that people who were there that night still talk about. Because Diana Wells, in a wedding dress, on what should have been the first night of her marriage, looked at the man walking toward her, and she was calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing panic. Not the brittle calm of someone about to break. The real thing. The calm of a woman who had already grieved, already decided, already arrived somewhere on the other side of the worst of it. Marcus reached her and spoke in a voice low enough that only the people immediately around them could hear. "Diana, I can explain." And Diana looked at him, just looked at him, and said, quietly, clearly, with a steadiness that somehow carried through the silence better than any shout could have, "No, you really can't." And the power in that room, which had always belonged to him, shifted. Completely. Permanently. But she wasn't finished. What Diana did next was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. There was no shouting, no sobbing, no throwing of flowers or overturning of tables. She reached up and removed her wedding ring, the one that had made 3 people gasp when she first showed them, and she placed it on the table in front of her with the careful, deliberate motion of someone who has thought about this moment and decided exactly how it should feel. She picked up her small white clutch purse. She looked at Marcus once more, not with hatred, not with contempt, with something closer to pity and something even closer to peace, and she walked. Not quickly, not urgently, but with the unhurried, dignified stride of a woman who knows exactly where she is going and has decided that wherever it is better than where she has been. The crowd parted for her. For 100 people, silent, watching her move toward the exit, and not a single one of them stepped in front of her or called her name to stop her. At the door, she paused. She did not turn around. She simply said, in that same clear, steady voice, to the room that had witnessed everything, "Enjoy the rest of the evening." And she walked out, and the consequences came fast. The morning after a wedding night that Marcus Calloway spent alone in a hotel suite, fielding calls that went mostly unanswered, the damage had already begun to compound. By noon, 2 of the investors who had been in that ballroom had each placed calls to the 3rd member of their group. By the following morning, a preliminary review of their partnership terms had been quietly initiated. The development deal, the one the industry press had called historic, entered what was officially described as a period of reassessment. Unofficially, it was in serious trouble. The story, as these stories do, had begun to travel. Not as gossip exactly, as something worse. As a defining narrative. As the story about Marcus Calloway, the one that now came before everything else whenever his name was mentioned. His mother did not call for 4 days. His closest colleague, a man he had known since graduate school, sent a single text that said nothing except, "I don't know what to say to you." His reputation, which he had spent 20 years constructing with the same meticulous care he applied to every building he had ever developed, began to show its cracks. And cracks in a structure that is built on performance, on image, on the appearance of power, those cracks do not repair. They spread. Because the thing about a man who has always used his public image as his greatest asset is that when that image breaks, he has nothing underneath it to fall back on. No genuine goodwill. No authentic relationships. No foundation that was ever built on something real. Marcus Calloway had built a tower, and Diana Wells, with 47 seconds of footage and the patience of someone who had decided to be strategic instead of reactive, had walked away from it just before it fell. Diana, for her part, did not disappear into the aftermath the way the people who knew her might have expected. She took 2 weeks, completely offline, no social media, no professional obligations, just herself and her mother and a small rental house near the coast where she had spent summers as a child. She cried there, in private, the way she had not allowed herself to cry at the wedding. She grieved there the version of her future that she had believed in, because grief is real even when what you are grieving turns out to be a lie. You grieve the version of yourself that was happy. You grieve the specific kind of hope you had allowed yourself to feel. And that grief is legitimate, regardless of what the person who caused it deserved. But Diana was not someone who lived in grief. She was someone who processed it and moved through it and came out the other side with a clarity that she might never have found otherwise. She came back to the city 6 weeks after the wedding. She returned to her work, which had not needed her to be married to respect her. She rebuilt her routines, the Sunday cooking, the twice-weekly calls to her mother, the small circle of people who knew her actual laugh. She was offered a senior consulting position at a firm that had been trying to recruit her for 2 years, and she took it. She cut her hair. She started running again, not to escape anything, but because she had remembered that her body was hers and that she had spent nearly a year neglecting it in service of a relationship that was never built on the truth. She was not performing resilience. She was simply living it. And slowly, not all at once, and not without difficulty, she became the version of herself that the entire experience, for all its devastation, had somehow made more possible. There is something that happens to a woman who survives what Diana survived. Not the betrayal. People survive betrayal all the time, and it leaves scars, but scars are not the end of anything. What Diana survived was the particular and acute experience of discovering that the story she had been living in was false, that the ground she was standing on was not real. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that this story keeps coming back to, is that she did not allow that discovery to make her someone who believed nothing. She did not close. She did not harden into the kind of person who trusts no one and expects the worst from everyone, which would have been the understandable response, the human response, and still the wrong one. She instead became someone who had a clearer, sharper understanding of what was real and what was performance. She became someone who could tell the difference, almost immediately, between depth and decoration. She became harder to fool, not because she had stopped believing in people, but because she had stopped needing to believe in the version of herself that someone else was selling back to her. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. The strength that does not announce itself. The composure that has earned its steadiness. The woman who sat at that wedding table and decided that the most powerful thing she could do was simply to be the one who told the truth, and then to let the truth do what truth always does, eventually, when given the chance. Diana Wells had walked into that ballroom as someone's wife. She had walked out as herself. And as it turned out, that was the better destination all along. Here is the lesson in all of this, and it is not a simple one, which is why it is worth sitting with. The lesson is not that revenge is satisfying, although this particular story has a kind of symmetry to it that is undeniably gratifying to witness. The lesson is not even about karma, though what happened to Marcus Calloway had its own inevitable logic. The lesson is about what Diana chose in that bridal suite when she had every reason to collapse. The lesson is about the decision to remain composed, not because the pain was not real, but because she understood instinctively that how she responded to this moment would define her more than the moment itself. She could have screamed. She could have confronted him in the corridor that morning and turned the whole thing into chaos. She could have been, and anyone who has been in anything like her position would understand this. She could have been completely undone. Instead, she chose to be the one who already knew. And there is something extraordinary in that. There is a kind of quiet, almost unbearable strength in the woman who has already done her grieving before the room has even learned there is something to grieve. who has already made her decision before anyone has asked her for one, who does not need to shout to be heard, who does not need to break to be powerful. The most dangerous version of composed is the one that has nothing left to lose and has already chosen, with total clarity, exactly what it intends to do. If this story moved you, if any part of it made you feel something, made you think about the kind of person you want to be when the hardest moments arrive, this channel is the place you need to be. Subscribe right now. Every week, there are stories like this one, stories about real human strength, about the moments when ordinary people make extraordinary choices, about what happens when someone refuses to be the victim of a story that was written for them by someone else. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear that composure is power, that dignity is not weakness, and that walking away, the right way, at the right moment, is sometimes the most devastating thing you can do. Because some exits are not endings. Some exits are the only door that leads somewhere worth going. And Diana Wells walked through hers.